The rain had come sudden, hard, and without warning, like so many things that changed Callum Hayes' life. It pounded the tin roof of the cabin like fists demanding entry, echoing through the narrow valleys and dark pine slopes that stretched for miles around. Thunder crawled across the sky in deep, growling rumbles. Callum sat alone in the glow of a dying fire, a chipped whiskey glass trembling slightly on the wood-planked floor beside him. His rifle leaned against the far wall, untouched for months. He hadn't had need for it, not since he'd sworn off everything that bled and broke. That night, he'd been 3 fingers deep into a bottle of rye, staring at the flame like it might flicker out and taken with it when someone knocked on the door. Not a bang, not a frantic rattle, just a slow, deliberate knock. Callum froze. No one came out this far. The trail that led to his place was overgrown with silence and bad memories. The last visitor he'd had was a moose in rut. He rose slowly, shoulders stiff, joints aching like they always did when the storms rolled through. He crossed the room in silence, boots creaking on old wood. The knock came again, 3 quiet raps, spaced just enough to sound human. He opened the door. A woman stood there in the rain, her face pale, drawn, soaked straight through. She held something in her arms, a bundle wrapped in a cavalry blanket stained with old blood. The rain fell in sheets around her, framing her like something out of a half-forgotten dream or a fever. Her eyes locked onto his. "He ain't yours," she said, her voice hoarse, trembling. "But he needs you." Callum blinked, uncertain whether he'd heard right. Before he could speak, she pressed the bundle into his chest. It was heavier than he expected. Warm. Alive. A baby. "What the hell is this?" he rasped. I ain't," she started, but then her eyes darted toward the trees. Panic. Desperation. And then she ran. "Wait," he barked, stepping after her, but she was already gone, swallowed whole by the storm and forest. Her footfalls vanished into the thundering rain. He stood on the threshold, heart hammering, clutching the child, as if it might vanish too. Lightning cracked. He flinched. The baby stirred. A thin, reedy cry escaped the folds of the blanket. Callum looked down at the child, small, dark-haired, red-faced, with a mouth twisted in fury. The sound was sharp and immediate, cutting through the quiet like a blade. He cursed under his breath, then slammed the door shut. Inside, the cabin felt smaller now, heavier with presence. He laid the baby gently on the table and stepped back like it might explode. "What in God's name?" The baby wailed louder, voice shrill and demanding. Callum ran a hand down his face and paced. He hadn't touched a child since. No, he cut that thought off quick. That path led nowhere good. He dug through old cabinets, found an unopened can of condensed milk and a cracked bottle. No nipples, no clean rags. He heated the milk over the stove, testing it on the inside of his wrist, like he remembered someone doing once. Maybe his wife. Maybe a memory from some other life. He tried to feed the baby. The child refused at first, mouth clamped shut. But hunger always wins. The tiny mouth latched, drank greedily. Callum sat down, just stared. Rain drummed louder, trying to get in. "Why me?" he muttered. The baby didn't answer, just stared at him with wide, blinking eyes. There was something unsettling in how calm he looked now, like he'd already decided to stay. Callum wrapped him tighter in the blanket, frowning as he did. There was something stiff inside the folds. He reached in and pulled out a locket. Silver. Worn. Inside, a miniature photo tucked in. Faded but unmistakable. Jesse. His brother. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Callum dropped into the chair, locket hanging from one hand, his breath frozen somewhere between disbelief and fury. Jesse had been dead to him for more than a decade. Long enough for the rage to go quiet and the wounds to scar over. Or so he thought. The baby squirmed again. A thin, high whimper rose from its throat. Callum stood slowly, the way a man does when he's about to make a choice that can't be undone. Outside, the wind shifted. Something moved. He turned toward the window. Shadows danced in the treeline, too smooth for wind, too steady for storm. His hand found the rifle. It wasn't instinct, it was muscle memory. The same way you reach for a drink when your past shows up on your doorstep. He held the baby close with one arm, the rifle hanging at his side. No lights. No fire. He waited. The shapes didn't move again. Not for an hour. Then, one by one, they disappeared. Riders, maybe. Or ghosts. The baby had fallen asleep, finally. His tiny hand wrapped around Callum's shirt, breath soft against his chest. Callum stood there for a long while listening to the storm die, wondering what kind of devil had just arrived in his life. The locket lay on the table, open, reflecting the last flicker of firelight. He traced his brother's face with a calloused finger. Jesse looked young in that photo. Unbroken. Before everything went wrong. Before they picked opposite sides of the same fight. Callum poured another inch of rye. Sat down. Took one long drink. "He ain't yours," she'd said. But she hadn't said whose he was. He stared into the fire again. And this time it stared back. Far off, another crack of thunder rolled down the valley. But Callum didn't flinch. He held the baby tighter and whispered almost to himself, "What the hell did you just bring to my door, girl?" Outside, the wind shifted again. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the firelight, something was watching. Callum Hayes hadn't held a child in over 20 years. Not since the day they buried Charlotte. Not since he stood alone beside a wooden box the size of a cradle, fists clenched, jaw locked, and heart torn straight through. He'd sworn then never again. Never to hope. Never to hold. Never to care. Yet here he was, bathed in pale morning light leaking through cracked shutters, rocking a stranger's baby in his arms while the fire burned low and the memory of her words echoed like a curse. Asterisk. He ain't yours, but he needs you. Asterisk. The child, Micah, he'd started calling him, slept against his chest, one tiny fist curled near his jawline. Callum could feel the boy's warmth, the rise and fall of his breath, and something fragile tugging loose inside his ribs. Outside, the rain had slowed to a dull drizzle. The forest steamed in the weak light, mist rising from pine needles like smoke from a dying fire. The world looked clean again, but he knew better. He barely slept. Instead, he sat in that creaking rocker all night, rifle on his lap, the locket resting open beside him. Jesse's face haunted the metal, like it was burned in place. Same square jaw, same wild eyes, same grin that always meant trouble. His brother was dead, probably. If he weren't, he sure as hell should be. The baby stirred, gurgled, then settled again. Callum sighed, heavy and tired. He knew what had to come next. He saddled his mule by noon. Packed light. Just the boy, the rifle, and the locket. He wrapped Micah in a wool coat, secured him in a satchel he'd reworked into a makeshift sling, and rode out slow through the fog-choked woods. The ride into town was silent but taut. Every snapping twig, every crow's cry, every rustle of branches pulled his nerves tight. He kept one hand near his revolver. Whoever had come near the cabin last night hadn't stayed for pleasantries. And they sure as hell hadn't come for conversation. The town of Iron Hook looked as gray as ever. Wooden facades stained with years of dust and rain, windows smudged with regret. It wasn't much more than a rail stop and a place to die. He tied the mule at the edge of town and walked. People stared as he passed, eyes narrowing beneath wide brims. They hadn't seen him in over a year, and now he was back with a baby. He stopped at the sheriff's office first. The bell above the door jangled as he stepped in. Sheriff Nolan sat behind the desk, boots up, toothpick jutting out from his mouth. He was old now, half blind in one eye, one leg shorter than the other thanks to a bullet from a bar fight in '84. But his voice still cut like barbed wire. "Well, I'll be damned. Callum Hayes. Thought you rode off into legend or madness." Callum shifted Micah slightly, still deciding. The sheriff sat up slow. "That a baby?" "It is." "Yours?" "No." "Well, hell." Nolan took a long look at the child, then at Callum, then leaned back and exhaled. "You didn't come here for pleasantries." "Nope." "Then let's cut to the marrow." Callum set the locket on the desk. The silver glinted dully in the low light. Nolan picked up, squinted. "That Jesse?" Callum nodded. "Where'd you get this?" "Woman came to my door. Handed me the baby. Said he wasn't mine, but he needed me. Then she ran." "You get her name?" "No, but I think you might." Nolan exhaled through his teeth. "Sadie Granger." Callum's jaw tightened. She used to run with Jesse's crew. She and Jesse. Well, there was always something there. She disappeared after that big transport raid outside Dead River last fall. Feds think she's dead. Or worse. Callum looked down at Micah. The baby blinked up at him, quiet and observant. Nolan rubbed his temple. Word is Jesse's gang turned on itself after the heist went sideways. Half of them dead. Other half scattered. But that locket? That's the kind of thing only family would have. So this is Jesse's boy. Could be. Callum leaned in. "What aren't you telling me?" Nolan hesitated. Before he died, if he is dead, Jesse made enemies. Real ones. Not just the feds. He burned some folks bad. Left bodies in ditches, took gold that didn't belong to him. Word's gotten around that someone's looking for what he left behind. Callum's voice was flat. You think this baby is the key? Maybe. Or bait. Either way, if Sadie brought him to you, then trouble's not far behind. Callum scooped up the locket and stood. It's already here. He left without another word. The saloon was next. Not for drink, but for Maria. She was the only one left in Iron Hook he still trusted. A widow twice over, she ran the saloon with a temper like hot lead and a heart too big for bottle she kept under the bar. When she saw him, her eyebrows lifted. Well, hell's bells. You brought a baby to my doorstep, Hayes. Can we talk? She led him upstairs into her small, tidy room that smelled faintly of lilac and pipe smoke. He laid Micah on the bed, careful. This ain't no orphan charity, she said, arms crossed. Callum looked her dead in the eye. It's Jesse's. Her face paled. Maria had known Jesse once. Maybe too well. He told her everything, what the sheriff said, what the woman had done, what he feared might be coming. She sat in silence for a moment. Then she nodded, slow. You planning on keeping him? I don't know. Do you want to? He didn't answer. But that was answer enough. All right, she said, standing. You can leave him here for a few days. My sister's boy left a crib in the back room. He'll be safe. Callum hesitated. If they come, they won't get through me. He turned back to the baby, brushed a hand over his cheek. Micah stared up at him with those wide, curious eyes. Jesse's fiery thought. But something else too. Something quieter. He left the boy there, knowing it was the safest place for now. And as he walked out of town, back toward the trees and the road that led home, his thoughts darkened like the clouds gathering again above the ridge. The storm wasn't done. When he reached the cabin, he noticed the silence first. No birds, no wind, just the hush of something waiting. Then he smelled the smoke. He broke into a run. Flames licked the cabin roof, curling from inside like fingers clawing at the sky. The fire was already too far gone. He'd taken Micah with him, thank God, but everything else, his journals, his wife's photograph, the last remnants of a life long buried, burned as he stood there helpless. Footprints circled the ashes. Hoof prints. A broken pine branch. They'd come looking. And they'd come close. He bent, lifted something from the mud, a spent match, snapped clean at the head. Purposeful. Professional. He turned back toward the trail. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't just a caretaker now. He was a target. And whatever Jesse had done to make these men burn down a ghost's house, it wasn't over. Callum whispered to the trees, low and sharp, I ain't running. Not this time. Then he turned rifle in hand and walked toward the smoke-hung sky, toward whatever reckoning waited beyond the ridge. The smell of burnt pine still clung to his coat when Callum descended into the ravine. The wind had shifted sometime before dawn, carrying the smoke east and with it any comfort he might have still held on to. He rode with his hat low, a rifle slung behind his shoulder, and Micah strapped tightly to his chest in a sling he'd fashioned from an old saddle blanket. The boy was quiet, almost too quiet, as though he understood they were running from something too dark to name. Callum didn't like running, but he knew better than to fight a war without knowing the battlefield. That had been Jesse's problem, always quick to draw, too slow to see the trap being laid. Now Jesse was dead or close enough, and the baby he'd left behind had painted a target on Callum's back. They rode west through narrow gulches and twisted game trails Jesse had once used to smuggle liquor past the old Union patrols. It had been a long time since Callum had thought about those days. Back then, it had felt like they were just two shadows playing games in the dark, stealing from ghosts and daring the law to catch them. Now there was no game, only a reckoning. By midday, he reached the edge of Dead Mare Canyon, a jagged cut of rock and wind with a rusted mining shaft carved deep into the stone wall. Jesse had once kept a cache here, guns, rations, coin. Callum had helped him dig it. With luck, it was still untouched. He tethered the mule under a narrow overhang and moved inside, one hand gripping his revolver, the other steadying Micah. The shaft opened into a black, musty hollow. Bats stirred in the ceiling rafters, wings rustling like dry paper. He found the stash beneath a loose stone slab, just as he remembered. A rusted iron box held 2 pistols, ammunition, a sealed flask, and a rolled map marked with old symbols, Jesse's handwriting. But the real find was the bundle tucked underneath, a faded photograph wrapped in oilskin. It showed Sadie, young and fierce-eyed, holding a baby not more than a few weeks old. Jesse stood beside her, arms slung lazily across her shoulders. But it wasn't the warmth in their smiles that stopped Callum. It was the message scrawled on the back in pencil. If I don't make it out, he's yours. Do better than me. J****. Callum sat down on the stone floor and exhaled slowly. The weight of the message pressed into his chest like a bullet wound. He held Micah close, unsure whether the ache in his chest was anger or guilt, or something worse, hope. A rustle behind him. He turned fast, gun up, eyes narrowed. A figure stepped from the shadows, thin, limping, and wrapped in a torn cloak. Sadie. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked, blood dried on her temple. One shoulder hung lower, like it had been broken, and never quite healed right. Her eyes, though, still burned. Put that down, Hayes, she rasped. I ain't here to kill you. Callum didn't lower the gun. You already tried once. Sadie staggered to the wall, slid down it. That fire wasn't me. I swear it. He looked her over. She didn't have the strength to lie. Not anymore. They found me, she said. Silas and the others. Jesse's old crew. They think Micah's the last thing Jesse left behind. Think he's the key to some treasure. Money. Bonds. They'll tear the world apart to find it. Callum's eyes narrowed. What treasure? Sadie coughed. Her breath rattled. It's a lie. Jesse never had anything but smoke and charm. But Silas doesn't believe that. He thinks Jesse left it with me or with a boy. Callum looked at Micah, then back at her. So why bring him to me? Her face tightened. Because you're the only decent man either of us ever knew. Silence stretched between them. I didn't want to die with his blood on my hands, she whispered. And I sure as hell didn't want him raised by wolves. Callum lowered the gun, sat on his haunches across from her. You dying? Sadie nodded once. He didn't ask from what. The answer was written in her eyes. She leaned back against the rock. You ever think about Charlotte? The question cut deeper than the canyon. All the time, he said quietly. I think about Jesse, she said. The good parts. The boy he was. Before the guns. Before the gang. Before I helped break him. Micah stirred, let out a soft sound, then fell back to sleep. I'll bury you, Callum said. When it happens. Right. With words. Don't waste the words on me, she said. Save them for him. She closed her eyes, and this time they didn't open again. Callum sat in silence, listening to the wind rise. By dusk, he'd built a cairn of stone at the edge of the canyon. No name, no cross. Just silence. He read the note again, Jesse's scrawl scarring the back of that photo like a dying confession. Do better than me. He would try. But first, he'd have to survive. He rode east again. The canyon behind him. The boy in front. They reached Maria's saloon after midnight. The place was locked up, quiet. But when he knocked, she opened the door like she'd been waiting. You look like you buried the world, she said. Just a part of it. She stepped aside. Callum handed her Micah, without a word. The baby didn't stir. Maria looked at him with something close to pity. You going back out? He nodded. There's a price on your head now, she said. There's a child in that crib with my name tied to his life, he replied. So let them come. Maria touched his arm. Don't be a fool, Callum. I already was, he said. Now I'm just a man with nothing left to lose. He turned and walked into the night, saddlebag over his shoulder, revolver holstered tight, and Jesse's map folded in his coat. Silas would come. He was certain of it. And when he did, Callum would be ready, not just with bullets, but with the fire of a man who'd finally remembered what it meant to protect something that couldn't protect itself. Somewhere behind him, a wolf howled in the dark. He didn't look back. The desert air carried the scent of gunpowder and mesquite as Callum Hayes stood beneath a blood-red sky, boots firm in the cracked earth, hands slick around the worn grip of his Colt. His breath came slow and steady, drawn from somewhere far below his ribs, like it had been dredged up from the years he'd buried. Ahead, the canyon mouth yawned wide, an ancient wound in the land. And just beyond that shadowed threshold, they waited. 5 men. Maybe more. Silas among them. Jesse's old lieutenant, all sinew and spite, the kind of man who smelled weakness like wolves did blood. They had tracked him across 2 counties, burned his home to ash, hunted the child like a coin purse. Now they wanted a final reckoning. They'd get one. Callum knelt behind a rock outcrop, the canyon walls rising like cathedrals around him. Above, the setting sun cracked the clouds open in long streaks of fire. He watched the trail with the patience of a predator. He'd laid the traps himself, tripwires strung to dynamite, buried shards, snares tucked beneath shale and dry brush. They thought he was an old dog with nothing left. They forgot he'd once been the storm. The first rider came into view just as the sun touched the ridge. Silas, with that vulture grin and shotgun across his lap. His horse snorted uneasy. Maybe it felt what was coming. The others flanked him. Lean, twitchy men with eyes like dark marbles and hands never far from their triggers. They slowed when they reached the choke point, where the walls narrowed and the light died. Callum waited. One of the horses screamed. Then came the fire. The dynamite blew with a concussive roar, shaking the cliffs, turning dust into smoke. The lead horse went down screaming, crushed beneath falling stone. Callum rose in the chaos, stepped out like a ghost from the ash, and fired twice. The first man fell hard. The second staggered, spun, then dropped. Screams filled the canyon, angry, panicked, disbelieving. Silas ducked low, rolled off his horse, came up shooting. A bullet clipped the brim of Callum's hat, sent it spinning. He dropped, rolled left, and returned fire. The shot struck rock. Then silence. Smoke drifted. A hawk circled overhead, screeching once before vanishing. Callum rose slowly, eyes sweeping the rubble. 3 bodies lay still. One man groaned, pinned under his horse. Another crawled backward, hands slick with blood. And Silas. Silas was gone. Callum cursed under his breath. He stepped forward, found the pinned man, just a kid, no older than 20. Blond, thin. Too scared to beg. Where'd he go? Callum asked, voice low. I don't know, the boy stammered. Callum didn't ask again. He turned away. A shadow moved up on the cliffside, quick, like a darting coyote. Silas. The bastard was circling, trying to get elevation. Callum sprinted across the canyon floor, boots skidding over loose shale. He climbed fast, breath burning. He found the trail, barely visible, winding along the ridge, like a snake's back. He heard Silas before he saw him, panting, muttering to himself, reloading. Callum crested the ridge, just as Silas turned. Their eyes met. Silas fired. The shot tore into Callum's side. Pain exploded through him, hot and jagged. He staggered but didn't fall. Fired back. The bullet caught Silas in the shoulder, spun him halfway around. He screamed and stumbled, backpedaling near the ledge. Callum advanced slowly, bleeding, revolver raised. You should have stayed dead, Silas growled, clutching his wound. You should have picked a quieter life, Callum replied. You think this ends with me? No, Callum said. It ends with him safe. Silas lunged. They collided near the cliff's edge, the struggle primal and vicious. Fists, blood, grit. Callum's gun went flying. Silas had a knife, rusted, jagged. It sliced Callum's coat, bit into skin. But Callum drove his knee into the man's gut, then head-butted him hard. Silas reeled, stepped back, and his foot found nothing. He fell. The scream was long, swallowed by wind and stone. Then silence. Callum stood alone, panting, bleeding, his shirt dark with red. He stayed there for a long time, watching the sun vanish behind the hills. The pain dulled, or maybe he just stopped noticing. He limped back down into the canyon. By the time he reached the floor, the kid was gone. The other men, too, vanished like smoke on the wind. Fine. Let him run. The war was over. 2 days later, he returned to Iron Hook. Maria met him at the edge of town, eyes wide as she saw the blood, the torn coat, the look in his eyes. You walk through fire? She asked. He didn't answer. Inside, the saloon was warm, filled with the smell of fresh bread and tobacco. Micah was in the back, nestled in a crib, babbling quietly, fists waving like he was boxing shadows. Callum stepped to the edge of the crib, stared down at him. The boy smiled. Callum dropped to one knee, the pain catching up all at once. He braced himself against the crib's rail and let out a ragged breath. "You got your daddy's fight," he whispered, "but I reckon you've got my luck." Maria watched from the door, wiping her hands on a rag. "What now?" Callum stood, slower this time. "I build a place," he said, "out by the ridge, with strong walls, a porch, maybe a dog." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Settling down." He looked at Micah. Reckon someone's got to teach him how to shoot straight and live better than his bloodline ever did. She smiled then, not the teasing one, but something warmer. Softer. You'll stay. Callum nodded. I buried enough ghosts. That night, after Micah had fallen asleep, Callum sat by the window with a mug of coffee, wrapped in clean bandages. The moon rode high, silver and silent. He opened the locket one last time. Jessie's face stared back, younger than Callum remembered, almost innocent. He held it up to the window light, then closed it gently, set it down, and turned away. He didn't need the past anymore. Only the road ahead. In the quiet, he spoke, not to the room, but to the memory of the woman who'd knocked on his door in the rain. I didn't ask for him. Didn't want him. But he's mine now, and I'll carry that. Micah stirred in the next room. Callum stood, walked to the crib, and rested a hand on the boy's back. Strong heartbeat. Steady breath. He smiled. Then he said, not to the boy, but to whatever might come next. I don't know what kind of man I'll be, but I know what kind of man he'll never have to fear. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the desert and the whisper of a new beginning. And somewhere just beyond the edges of that quiet little town, trouble watched from the shadows, waiting maybe or deciding. But Callum Hayes had already decided. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.